the best way to counter these arguments is to bring people here, to bring people to Israel, because no one that's ever been here, I would say 99% of the time when I have brought non-Jewish people here, it's almost the most effective thing you can possibly do to counter that argument. So I would say to you that it's an uphill struggle. I probably, if you want to fight that battle, then there are the things we can find on our website to try and counter those arguments. But the best thing to do in those sorts of forums is to bring people here. I appreciate that's not probably easy to do with strangers online.
But Honest Reporting wouldn't respond to them.
We would respond if it's worth it, if they are big enough, if they are, we have responded to them. We have produced a video on this particular subject and content on this subject. If you forward it to me, I'll be happy to get the team to respond to it. It'd be a pleasure.
What's your email?
David@honestreporting.com.
Thank you.
Hi, David. I'm sorry about that. I got cut off.
Okay.
B Games has asked a question. There is a constant stream of videos shared on Twitter showing Israeli military brutality. Are all of them false? What proportion of them should we be worried about?
What proportion of them should you be worried about? Look, when it comes to the imagery of this conflict, let me put it this way. The Israeli army have been preparing for 7 years for this conflict, okay? From the end of the last conflict, the major conflict in Gaza in 2014, up until this point, the Israeli army were preparing, okay? It is remarkable that the small number of civilian casualties which were killed in Gaza, each one, of course, is terrible, but Hamas freely admit that at least 200 of the people that were killed were their fighters, okay, were their activists, were terrorist members of Hamas. So Israel's done a remarkable job. Israel has been preparing since the day that last war ended. The military have been preparing for this next conflict, which is why they targeted these underground tunnels, weapons caches. Very often you may have seen that when an Israeli attack took place, initial explosion would happen. Very quickly after that, another explosion would happen, not from that missile, but from the weapons, the missile weapons caches exploding. So Israel has been preparing for this conflict. The Palestinians, the Hamas in particular, I don't say this about the whole Palestinian people, Hamas in particular have been preparing in the same way for these images, to create these images, okay? That's the war which is Israel is fighting right now. Now, Israel, unfortunately, to this day, and I know it's a remarkable thing to say, it still does not take this media battle as seriously as it should. It just doesn't. I can't tell you the amount of times when I've developed relationships with media, and they've said to me, "Oh, I'm pleased you've called because we tried to get the Israeli ambassador, but he wasn't available." And you're thinking to yourself, so it's a war between Israel and Gaza and Hamas. On the media battlefield, there's no doubt we're having a terrible, terrible time, and the Israeli ambassador isn't available. So that's a remarkable thing. So look, we step in and we do a very, very good job. I'm sorry you couldn't hear Daniel Pomerantz making the case, but we do a very, very good job. So still, I do not feel, to their credit, they take these things seriously. When you talk to the Israeli in the street, and this is true from the man on the street to ministers in the government, they have come to a conclusion that, you know what, the whole world doesn't like us, we'll never win this battle, we need to win the battle on the battlefield, and that's where we'll put all our efforts. Unfortunately, the people that work in PR in Israel, I'm talking about on behalf of the government, I don't think they're the sharpest tools in the shed. They're not Israel's finest. They're not Israel's greatest brains. For all the intelligence and the brain power which operates in Israel, Israel's finest brains and communicators are not engaged in this PR battle. But we're working hard to convince them how important it is, and we are making efforts. So, you know, how worried should you be? I think you should be very worried. I think you should be very worried.
Are you the only agency that deals with this type of thing in Israel?
There's no one else doing precisely what we're doing. There's no one else with a dedicated media central office. It's one of the finest media operations in Israel, dedicated to giving Israel's side of the story. There's no one else doing that aside from the government press office. But as I mentioned to you, you know, they try their hardest, but you know, as Margaret Thatcher used to say, you know, it's the sort of dead hand of Whitehall, I would call it. They're not the most energetic operators. They try their hardest, you know, but then it's not the most professional of organizations. So, but there are other people doing these things. There's Stand With Us doing things online. There's Camera. You know, there's other sort of organizations, but no one has a dedicated Israeli press office like we have.
So B says she meant really, how worried should you be about actual incidents of Israeli brutality?
I think that any brutality which is not defensive or not part of a military action hasn't got any justifiable reason for it, is to be condemned unreservedly. I mean, you know, there must be a difference between the way a terrorist organization operates and the way the Israeli army operates. So I think that whenever there is a case of brutality against unnecessary, unwarranted, unlawful brutality against Palestinians, it should be prosecuted to the highest extent of the law. And you know what? Israel's media, when you live here, you see how self-critical they actually are. You know, Shimon Peres was famously asked, what did the Jewish people give to humanity? And the answer came back, dissatisfaction. You know, Israelis are constantly complaining about themselves. They are constantly criticizing themselves. The media as well is constantly self-critical in the most remarkable way. You wouldn't believe how self-critical Israelis themselves are of their own society. So whenever there is a case of brutality, it should be condemned, it should be investigated, and it is. And it is. You can be sure of that.
Daryl wants to know, how are you funded?
Well, actually, Daryl, that's a fantastic question, because that's why I'm here tonight. We are funded by Jewish communities and Jewish philanthropists and some Christian communities in the US and some Christian philanthropists around the world. That's how we're funded. Our budget is around $2.5 million. And if any of you feel like you would like to support our work, we'd be very, very happy to receive your donation. It's tax deductible, it's gift aidable. You can go onto our website and you can make a donation that way, and we'd be very, very happy to receive your support, because we cannot do this work without you. It's not the Israeli government supporting us, unfortunately, although we work very, very closely together with the Prime Minister's office and the army and the army spokesman's office. We work hand in hand with them completely, but they don't fund us. So it's only communities around the world, and Israelis as well, that are helping to fund us. So Daryl, please dig deep. I don't know where you are, Daryl. There you are, Daryl. Well, I know you've had a good game of tennis today. You're looking particularly tanned. I'm sure that your yacht is just waiting. You're waiting off Potter's Bar there, which you're about to jump onto. You can't reply to me, which is wonderful. So just before you have a cocktail on that yacht tonight, send us a nice, go onto our website, make a big donation. That'd be very, very wonderful. Sorry, Daryl, if I've offended you.
So 2 people have just made a comment about possibly things that have just been said. Okay. Irene said, let's hope the Israeli ambassador to the UK remains unavailable to the media here.
I'd be interested to hear what people thought, how she did. I watched all of her interviews. I'm just sort of, I lived in the UK for 45 years, for heaven's sake, and was involved in Israel advocacy in the UK. So it's, very, very passionate. I feel very, very passionately towards you. I take it from that comment that you didn't think she did a good job.
Irene, do you want to unmute yourself? Where is she?
No.
No, you don't. Fine. Okay. And Gillian has said PR name Gary Wexler said tonight that there is too much in wrangling in Jewish and Israeli organisations, and it requires a hard thinking development of focus and strategy.
I think that you are talking about a genetic rewiring of the Jewish people, which I don't see likely to happen in the very, very near future. Just looking at the weekly portion we just read yesterday of Shalach Lecha, you hear the spies arguing about the land itself, all of them admitting that it was a wonderful, wonderful land, but only two of them saying that we were able to conquer it, the rest of them saying it was a hopeless cause. This week we're talking about Korach, who was a famous dissident against Moses and Aaron, and these sorts of things live on live right in front of us here in Israel. The way that politics operates here in Israel, it's like you're reading the Bible, and the ferocity with which they challenge each other is the most remarkable thing. So I can't see that changing, and it's one of our strengths, to be blunt. You know, we're very, very self-critical. The famous story about 2 Jews, 3 opinions is absolutely correct. The famous story about that Jew who's found on a desert island after 25 years, and when it's discovered that desert island, his saviors find 2 synagogues there. And when he was asked, you know, I understand why you built 1 synagogue, but why 2? And he said, well, that one I don't go to. So, you know, that sort of stuff is very much alive and well in Israel, and that's the way I feel that Jewish people are wired, and I think that is the challenge which Jewish people face always, is that unity, that strength, which is, I think, is our Achilles heel. So anyone that can bring Jewish people together, I think, is a remarkable achievement.
Okay, Judy Ann said, B asked a question about Jeremy Bowen and Orla Gearin above. Did you have any dialogue with them about their reporting?
Yes, we did, and Tom Bateman as well. Tom, I haven't seen her reporting from Israel in the last few years, although she has in the past. Jeremy Bowen is very much for the BBC. He very much controls this whole area. To be blunt, Jeremy Bowen's view on Israel was very much affected by him being in a car on the Lebanese side of the Israeli border with a camera crew, an Arab camera crew, and Israel shelled that car, killing the cameraman, and him just barely escaping with his life, Jeremy Bowen. Jeremy Bowen it's almost impossible for him to get to see through that. Some might say understandably. So I think he's another journalist who was almost impossible to get through to. Tom Bateman is someone that has been here fairly recently. We had mutual friends, and I went to have a coffee with him to try and, before I worked for Honest Reporting, to try to engage with him, to try and see where he's coming from, to try and introduce him to different parts of Israeli society. But I tell you, my friends, it just didn't work. And you know, sometimes in your professional lives, when you've tried to open up something to someone and they're just not interested, that is exactly how I feel with Tom Bateman. He's just not interested in the Israeli point of view. He's just not interested. All of the stories, almost all of the stories he's done from here, during COVID as well. And COVID was a remarkable time. As you know, Israel had remarkable coverage, absolutely remarkable coverage. But even during that time, he found, the most negative part of the story. It's as if an Israeli journalist was reporting from London, and all the stories were live reporting from Toxteth or some sink estate in East London. Okay, that's where he did all his stories. So I saw COVID stories of going to Mencer, the very Orthodox area of Jerusalem, and speaking to the father of a family, of an 8-children family that live in a 1-bedroom apartment, and reporting, this is the story from Jerusalem. Yes, of course, that is part of the story of the COVID story in Jerusalem, but it's certainly not all of it. And but that is the part of the story which he reported on. So that's why I say to you, my friends, sometimes it's worth fighting a battle, and it's always worth fighting the battle, but it's certainly, I've tried to invest time, me personally, with someone like Tom Bateman, and it just has not been effective. I've invited him round for lunch at our place. I've tried to befriend him, but it hasn't worked because this is not part of the narrative which he wants to tell. He does not want to tell this part of the story. He just is, he's not interested.
Struggle more with the English journalists or the Americans?
At the time was where the Americans were more understanding. I would say there's a pretty much equality these days. Pretty much equality these days. It's pretty tough out there. It's pretty tough out there. But I mean, I say it's tough, but we need to keep fighting. It doesn't mean you give up. You need to keep pushing our side of the story. And, I realized that, I just came out from working for a couple of years at the Peres Center, and Shimon Peres's vision was very much about bringing people together, about a peaceful vision. And I would much prefer to talk about that. Believe me, I would much prefer to talk about bringing people together, about solving the issues around Israelis and Palestinians, which I think are very much solvable. But until there gets to be some sort of serious leadership on the Palestinian side, then I think that's pretty far from happening.
Just on a practical note, are you up half the night regularly, being there to help journalists?
Well, we have a 20-person team based in Jerusalem, but we've also got an office in Tel Aviv as well. I'm not one of the people that is up all night, but there are people up all night who are helping with the stories. But don't forget, it's only at these flashpoints, this 11-day conflict, where it is particularly intense. Most of the time, it is not this intense. Most of the time, I've had journalists complaining to me that there's nothing happening in Israel, and he keeps being sent to Egypt to follow a story there, or to Saudi Arabia. So for a long time, Israel, there was nothing happening here. It was boring, which is what we like, of course. Boring is good. So it's not all the time that it's this intense, but certainly during this recent conflict, it was particularly intense. And it's intense not only on a professional level, but as a new Oleh, when air raid sirens go off and you have to take your 4 kids into a mamad, a reinforced concrete room, and when the booms are so loud that they shake the metal shutter of the window, and when you come out after the air raid siren is finished, when you come out, you see the streaks right above my apartment of the Iron Dome, which has just intercepted a rocket, then I tell you, my friends, it feels pretty real. It feels pretty real. It's not part of the story which is covered much in the international media, although it's covered partly. But it's pretty nerve-wracking. I won't lie to you. It's very, very scary. I try not to show the fear to my wife and kids, and I make jokes and try and lighten the atmosphere. But I tell you, it is pretty scary when you hear those booms. It's not like it's almost like, oh, these are the international media will tell you they're like fireworks, glorified fireworks. Some of them report them as. But believe me, those booms are very, very loud, and they shake the building. So God forbid one of those should actually fall, as a few of them did, unfortunately. But thankfully, thank God, the Iron Dome system had a 90% success rate, despite the Palestinians' efforts to overwhelm the system. That was definitely their way of trying to get through, going to get the rockets through. But thankfully, the Iron Dome was very, very effective. Thank God.
Marilyn, if you want to unmute yourself and ask the question, because I got cut off, it's cut off some of the messages. So I don't know who didn't get their question answered. So there's a question still outstanding. If you want to ask it to David now before we finish, please unmute yourself. No? Okay, I don't think we have then.
Marilyn, can you unmute yourself?
Thank you. It wouldn't let me unmute, sorry. There's quite a few questions on here that haven't been answered. Oh dear. Somebody's asked a question about Tim Marshall. Do you know him?
Yes.
Be quite sympathetic, apparently.
Yes. Yeah, Tim Marshall is excellent. He's absolutely first class. I think his analysis of the conflict was one of the best analyses that I've seen. It was on Sky. He's the former Sky correspondent for the Middle East. Now I think he's an independent consultant or something like that. Writes books as well. But his analysis was first class. He wasn't always like that, my friends. He didn't start off his career like that. But I think that's one of the situations where, spending a lot of time here in Israel, he has developed an understanding of Israel's unique position and the real story here. So he very much saw right through the Sheikh Jarrah pretext of starting this war. He knew that was a pretext. He very accurately said, look, this is all about Hamas versus Fatah and the cancelled election, which Mahmoud Abbas, of course, knew he was going to lose. And this was about the Palestinian Hamas grabbing the agenda and making themselves to be the real guardians and the real fighters for the Palestinian cause. He identified that straight away. So no, Tim Marshall is excellent.
And my question was, it was about Sky and also about ITV. I mean, are the other media, not BBC, better in this country?
No.
Okay.
Unless you can tell me different, Marilyn. I mean,
well, I must say I did notice while the last war was going on, I noticed that at the beginning it was very anti-Israel. Yeah. Because I've listened to the BBC quite a lot, but I did notice about halfway through it evened out a little bit.
Right.
I don't know how that was, but it didn't seem to be quite so anti-Israel.
Well, look, lots of people have worked very, very hard to try and get an alternative point of view, and eventually it must have some effect. And so I think what you're recognizing is that effect taking place, giving an alternative point of view. And in situations like this, it's the best that we can do is just make sure that they at least report Israel's perspective, at the very, very least, rather than just the monopoly of pain and suffering is on one side and not on the other. So I hope that is a reflection of that.
Sorry,
I've got some questions here.
Yeah, Martin's asked, what about a new government? Any new government?
It looks, you write off Bibi at your peril. He's known in Israel as the magician. He's a remarkable politician. I don't say that as a supporter or a not supporter. Honest Reporting is not political and doesn't support one side or the other. It supports the democratically elected government of Israel. He is a remarkable survivor, and you write him off. And even all the Israeli commentators say, if this happens. But that said, it does look like this deal is going to happen. Before I got married, all the best advice I had from rabbis was that if your marriage is based on just one thing, then it's not going to work. I.e., she's so beautiful, my father-in-law is so rich, whatever it is, that one thing, then the marriage is not going to be successful. The uniting cause of this alternative government is, of course, anyone but Bibi. Now, once Bibi leaves the equation, you have got a very wide variety of political perspectives in this government. So most Israeli watchers are wondering how long a government like this could possibly function or survive. But then again, Israel is a very unusual place, and anything can happen. So there we go. So, but it does look like as early as Wednesday next week, or even what are we today? Monday. Even this week, I've heard that it could actually happen. So we'll see.
Okay, we'll have this as our last question from B again. Does Israel have any legislation in place to prevent hate speech and incitement on both sides in Israel?
It's certainly got legislation in place to prevent racist speech. Yeah, absolutely. If that's what you mean by hate speech, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It does. Yeah. I mean, I can't quote you chapter and verse, but yeah, it does have. I mean, even the far right parties in Israel, who Bibi was courting because he wanted them as part of his coalition, definitely toned down their rhetoric during the elections. But yes, it does have anti-hate speech legislation.
Okay, David, thank you so much. Wonderful evening, wonderful questions from the audience. And we really appreciate if everybody would like to unmute themselves and give David a round of applause. This is our Muswell Hill thing.
Here it comes, here it comes.
Yeah, you
I'm
ready?
feeling the love.
Yeah.
Feeling the love. Thank you very much, my friends. Thank you very much for
we appreciate you
taking the time on this.
Keep well and keep doing your good work.
Thank you very much.
Thank
please sign up on our website and help us if you can.
Okay, keep well.
Thank you.
Keep safe.
Bye now. Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Bye. Good night, everybody.
Good night.